why do we have to die? I mean, it's the question, right? The one that's arguably the most universal and unsettling one we all face. In this explainer, we're going to search for the answer, not in philosophy, but by diving deep into the fundamental laws of science.
Yeah, for pretty much all of human history, this question has sparked fear and inspired countless stories. But what if the answer isn't some great cosmic mystery? What if it's actually written into the code of the universe, our own DNA, and the very blueprint of life itself?
So here's our game plan. We're going to look for the answer through the lenses of physics, biology, and evolution. We'll start with the biggest picture possible, the vast laws of the universe. Then we'll zoom way in to the tiny ticking clocks inside our cells, before panning back out to see the grand evolutionary purpose of it all.
Okay, let's kick things off with physics. Because before we're biological beings, we're just physical objects. And the universe has a very strict, completely non-negotiable rule that governs everything.
That rule is called entropy. You might know it as the second law of thermodynamics. The easiest way to think about it is that the universe is fundamentally lazy. It always wants to move from a state of order to a state of disorder or chaos. Think about it. A clean room will naturally get messy over time, but it will never ever magically clean itself. That's entropy, and it applies to everything, from stars to buildings to our bodies.
But here's where living things like us are so incredible. We're open systems, which means we can fight back. We take in energy, food, and use it to maintain order and repair ourselves. We are basically rebels against the cosmic law of chaos. But, and it's a huge but, it's only a temporary rebellion. We can create order in our own little corner, but the universe as a whole is always moving towards disorder. And in the end, entropy always wins.
Okay, so entropy is a big cosmic idea. But there's another physical limit that's a lot more down to earth: simple mechanical fatigue. In other words, good old-fashioned wear and tear.
Think about it like a button on your remote control. Press it once, nothing happens. But press it a million times, and that constant, repetitive stress creates tiny, microscopic bits of damage that accumulate. Eventually, the button just breaks. It fails. Now think about your heart. It beats over 100,000 times a day. Every single beat adds a tiny bit of stress, a tiny bit of damage. Over a lifetime, all that damage adds up. It's a physical countdown to breakdown.
So that brings up a really good question. If we're constantly wearing out, why can't we just repair ourselves forever? I mean, our cells are always dividing and replacing old ones, right? Well, this is where biology comes into the picture. Turns out, our cells have their own built-in, non-negotiable deadline.
Deep inside every one of our cells, at the very tips of our chromosomes, we have these little protective caps called telomeres. The best analogy is the little plastic tip on your shoelaces. Its job is to keep the shoelace from fraying and falling apart. Well, telomeres do the exact same thing for our DNA, and they are the key to our biological clock.
When a cell is brand new and healthy, its telomeres are nice and long, giving plenty of protection to all that important DNA inside. But here is the catch. Every single time a cell divides to make a copy of itself, that protective telomere cap gets just a little bit shorter. It's like a biological fuse that's burning down a tiny bit with every single cell division, which happens millions of times throughout our lives. And after about 50 of these divisions, that fuse burns all the way down. The telomeres get too short to do their job. The cell gets a final signal that basically says, time's up. It stops dividing, and eventually it dies. It's a hardwired limit on how many times our bodies can press the reset button.
This, of course, leads to a fascinating thought experiment. What if we could just get rid of that limit? What if we could make our cells divide forever? Wouldn't that be the key to living forever?
Well, the terrifying answer is that we already know what happens when cells achieve this kind of immortality. We have a name for it: cancer. See, normal cells are team players. They're controlled, they listen to the telomere clock, and they stop when they're supposed to. Cancer cells are rebels. They break free from those limits. They ignore the clock and just divide uncontrollably. So that ticking clock isn't a flaw in our design. It's one of our most powerful built-in defenses. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Okay, so physics says we have to break down, and biology says we have a built-in self-destruct mechanism to prevent disaster. But this raises an even bigger question. Why? Why would evolution, a process that is absolutely obsessed with survival, design a system that guarantees our death?
The answer lies in a simple, kind of brutal reality of life on Earth. There just isn't enough stuff to go around. Resources like food, water, and even just physical space are all finite.
And here's the fundamental problem. The amount of resources available might increase slowly, in a straight line. But populations, when they're unchecked, they don't grow in a straight line. They grow exponentially. They double, and then double again. It's a mathematical certainty that that population line is going to shoot way past the resource line, leading to a total collapse.
So when you look at it through that lens, death isn't a tragedy for the species, it's a solution. It's a system that helps the species survive. It clears the board, freeing up limited resources for new generations. It allows the species to adapt and evolve by trying out new genetic combinations, and it prevents that catastrophic collapse from overpopulation. From the cold, hard perspective of evolution, for the species to thrive, the individual must end.
We've explored the physics, the biology, and the evolutionary why, but that still leaves the most personal question of all, right? What is this state we're all headed towards? What does it actually mean to experience death?
The first thing to realize is that death isn't like flipping a switch. It's a process. It starts with clinical death, when the heart and breathing stop. That's followed by brain death, which is the irreversible loss of all brain function. That's really the point of no return. But biological death isn't actually complete until the very last cell in the body stops working, which can be hours later.
So, all of this brings us back to that one question we can't help but ask. After all that, what does it feel like?
The most grounded, scientific answer is also maybe the most profound. What does it feel like after you die? Exactly the same as it felt before you were born.
Just think about that for a second. You weren't troubled by the 13.8 billion years of cosmic history that happened before you existed, right? There was no fear, no boredom, no loneliness. Why? Because the you that experiences things simply didn't exist yet. And that is the key. Death isn't an experience you have, it's the end of the experiencer. There's no one left to be aware of the void.
Which leaves us with a final and maybe the most crucial question. If death isn't a terrifying void we're all heading towards, but simply the closing of the curtain on our ability to experience, then maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps the real question isn't, why do we die? But given that we will, how do we make the most of this incredible, fleeting, and precious experience of being alive?